Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everyone is refueled. I'm going to keep us going because this is when we move from reflective, considered, long-time interventions to speed dating. Still as considered, it's still as thoughtful, but it's going to be fast. So we have 5-minute presentations from a range of funders, and I should start with myself. So I'm Christopher Smith, I'm from the AHRC, and there is a reasonable question to ask why the AHRC is involved in towards the national collection, because there is a sense in which my life would be very quiet if I just funded Greek papyrology, and there'd be lots of Greek papyrologists who'd be very, very happy. What is it about towards the national collection that fits brilliantly with the AHRC mission? So I could do that for hours, but I'm just going to reflect on what we've heard today and what it says in the Act which creates UKRI and AHRC within it. And it says that we have a responsibility for research, innovation that benefits society, economy, and well-being. It doesn't use the word well-being, but I'm going to read it in. Society and economy and well-being. This project has, in the past few hours that we've been here, multiply demonstrated the ways in which the research and innovation around, for, with collections does exactly that. So I'm really proud to be part of this project. We have 5 speakers: Liz Johnson, Director of the Museum Collections Department, Arts Council England; Sharon Heel, Director of the Museums Association; Isabel Hunt, Executive Director; Josie, Fraser, Head of Digital Policy at the National Lottery Heritage Fund; and Emma Squire, Director General for DCMS. And since it was just a couple of days ago that the report came out on the Cultural Recovery Fund, it's not inappropriate perhaps to say that whilst I know all of us will have our stories and so on and so forth, the Cultural Recovery Fund is a good deal of the reason why all of us are still open and going, and we owe a very, very significant vote of thanks to everybody in the teams who worked to make that happen. What we're now going to do is hear from each of the funders. They're all lined up in a row, 5 minutes each. I have my beady eye on the clock to tell us about their approaches. Then we'll have a discussion here about a few key themes, and then it will be open to you. I'm looking forward very much to your the conversation that you inspire. So, with no further ado, Liz.
Thank you so much, and it's lovely to be here today. Hi, everyone. So, Arts Council England is the national development agency for creativity and culture, and we set out our strategic vision in Let's Create, which is that by 2030 we want England to be a country in which the creativity of each of us is valued and given the chance to flourish, and where every one of us has access to a remarkable range of high-quality cultural experiences. From 2023 to 2026, we'll invest over £440 million of public money from the government and an estimated about £93 million from national lottery players each year in pursuit of that mission. A dynamic museums sector is absolutely critical to the delivery of Let's Create. By expanding public access to collections and making them more accessible to all audiences, museums can continue to delight and inspire as many people as possible. There's over 1,700 accredited museums in the UK, and they come in all shapes and sizes, as you know, with many different governance and operating model. And for many, a museum is the only cultural institution they have easy access to in their local area. Our digital work has 3 broad areas of focus covering arts, museums and libraries. That's content, distributions and platforms, data and audience development, and digital skills, or what I find really hard to say, which is digitally literate leadership, which I think is what we've been talking about a lot today. It's underpinned by 2 broad principles, the first of which is that audiences, business models and content are prioritised equally. And the second is that the use of new technology and digital literacy is a journey. We need to recognise that organisations are in different places in this. I think we also need to recognise that peak digital literacy is not a pyramid with larger, better funded organisations at the top. So how do we support digital literacy at the Arts Council? Well, our core offer is the Digital Culture Network, DCN. That's our in-house sector-facing digital skills consultancy, and it's comprised of 9 tech champions with their very distinct and different areas of expertise. They have come to Arts Council mainly from outside arts and culture, and they've supported over 3,300 cases with one-to-one support so far. About 10% of those are museums from about 150 organisations. We can do more. I'm ambitious for us to do more, so please, if you take something away, take that away and have a look at what the Digital Culture Network can do for you and your organisation. We also fund a network of organisations that support the sector, Collections Trust in the room, the Space, Arts Marketing Association, Stage Techs and Vocalise, who both focus on accessibility. Within Let's Create, we've got a great interest in place-based working and the digital divide. So there's a focus on understanding how digital technology can be leveraged by communities and hyper-local audiences. And of course, those museums I mentioned, who are the single points of contact for communities, they can use their resources to support people to access digital. But just to end on funding, which is what you would expect, we can and do support museums connecting with digital engagement with collections. Just this weekend, you'll have seen on Earth Day our collaboration with the Art Fund and their Wild Escape project, which is actually our biggest ever museum National Lottery project grant. So we're thrilled about that and how many schools and children and museums are able to take part. But we've also just announced that our Unlocking Collections priority within our National Lottery project grants has been extended to March 2024. So that's your second takeaway of something to go and do, is to have a look at how that can support work with collections. We fund projects which highlight the use of collections, whether that's for community-based engagement, the development of interpretation, or providing opportunities for museums to develop their digital skills and knowledge. There you go.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Christopher, for the introduction. So yes, I'm Sharon Heal from the Museums Association. For those of you, and I think many in the room will know, who don't know who we are, we're a membership organisation. We have over 10,000 individual members working in and with museums in the UK, and we also represent about 1,600 museums throughout the UK. And we're very much a values-led organisation. And we have a long history of research and thinking and innovation and funding in this space around collections, but also digital as well. We work with trusts and foundations to channel money into the sector, in particular the Esme Fairbairn Collections Fund, and we've given £11 million through them of grants to over 170 museums throughout the UK over the last 11 years. And that's particularly for bringing collections and communities together, something that we've discussed in part at this conference today. We also hold the Code of Ethics for the sector. As many of you will know, that code has 3 central tenets that are around public benefit, collection stewardship, and individual and institutional integrity. And I think it's been really interesting, actually, listening to the panels so far today, that a lot of ethical issues have arisen as a result of those contributions around artificial intelligence. There's some really interesting ethical issues for us to grapple with there, but also data and data use, data gathering, whose data, and where does that data come from? And of course, the legacy of empire and colonialism. So some really big, meaty ethical issues for us to grapple with as a sector. And just a heads up, we will be reviewing our code of ethics over the next couple of years to take on board some of those issues and also some of the impacts of COVID and some of the issues that have arisen out of that. So when I looked back on some of the work that we've done, I looked back to pre-COVID, and in April 2019, we published a big report called Empowering Collections. It was a major research project. We spoke to 1,000 people who work in and with museums in the UK and internationally, and we spoke to all the main stakeholders, funders and sector organisations. And the key findings from that were that museums can and should be empowering, relevant and dynamic when they work with their collections. And that echoes obviously some of the funding and campaigns that have come from Arts Council England and the Heritage Fund. And the report in particular around digital called for a culture change in collections practice. It noted that although museums had explored many new ways to bring collections to online audiences, there'd been a piecemeal approach to that work. And if we're being honest, you know, those of us that have been around a long time in museums, if you look back on the last 20 years, there's been a lot of funding, millions of pounds of funding for digital projects, and there's been some outputs, but I don't think it's led to a strategic approach or lasting change. The report called for that strategic overview in digital work in the sector, for museums to work together to make collections accessible online, and for us to learn how to effectively curate that online space for an online audience. So brilliant that Towards a National Collection is exploring all of those recommendations, and great to hear the progress that has been made at this conference today. At the Museums Association, we were also busy taking some of the recommendations of that report forwards, in particular working with our Supporting Decolonisation in Museums Guidance Working Group, and also some forthcoming work on disposal in the sector, a big issue that we have to tackle. But that report was produced and published in April 2019, and within 2 years we were sideswiped by COVID and everything changed. And I think if nothing else, COVID has taught us in the sector the value of online engagement, the value of digitisation, the value of our digital assets. You know, if only we'd known now what we know now before COVID took place. But we also learned of the strong need to connect collections and communities, and that taking digital poverty to one side, and we need to be aware of that in conferences such as this, online is still a critical way to make that connection. So for us as a funder during COVID, we changed our funding, as many others did. We produced a dedicated stream of funding called Sustaining Engagement with Collections, which distributed over £600,000 to 26 museums to do just that, to keep up that connection to audiences. So, for example, the National Justice Museum in Nottingham, that was doing in-person workshops with prisoners, switched to a workshop in an envelope, which then had an output online so that the wider public could engage with those outputs. And then coming out of COVID, we worked with UKRI and AHRC to deliver Digital Innovation and Engagement Fund, another 600,000 to museums to help scale up and understand that difference that COVID had made and our engagement with the public. So grants to, for example, Birmingham Museums Trust to run a 6-month project addressing industrialisation, colonialism and racial equality, and making the digital offer more inclusive. We also did research with the Art Fund and produced the Digital Impact in Museums and Galleries report, which is on our website, and the Art Fund's website, which asks questions about how museums can identify and understand online audiences and what it means for museums to operate effectively in that space. And the findings of that report are interesting and chime with many of the conversations we've had today. The lack of strategy at an institutional level is one of the biggest barriers. The lack of cross-institutional strategy is also a barrier, and the fact that we don't share knowledge. And also, museums want flexible funding in this area, which I'm sure we would all aim to do. So we know that funders need to be joined up, and I think we are better post-COVID than we were before, but there's more that we can do. And we also know that capacity, expertise and funding are under pressure. So how do we avoid duplication and get maximum impact for investment? I really hope we can build on the learning from the COVID and post-COVID period and use our digital platforms effectively and inclusively with our communities.
Thanks, Sharon. And thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I hope, like everyone else, I've really enjoyed today's conference. It's been great just to get out and hear about the discovery projects and actually learn a lot, but also to talk to so many people over coffee and in the breaks and make some physical connections, as well as the opening point about not just seeing people on a screen. It's been really great to be in a room after so long, having many meetings behind Teams. So I work at the National Lottery Heritage Fund. I hope many of you have heard who we are, but just a bit of a shameless plug, we are the UK's largest funder of heritage. We work nationally, so we work across England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, and we are a major funder. We are distributing about £300 million of national lottery funding per year into heritage. We don't define what we mean by heritage. We very much invite people to tell us what they value. And that can be built heritage, so historic buildings, it can be landscapes, it can be natural heritage. So we do a lot of work in the natural environment sector, but it also can be intangible heritage. So I always say, you know, sea shanties or memories or oral histories, the things that people value in their local communities and in society. Over COVID, like many other funders, we sort of pivoted our whole approach and we moved to providing sort of emergency funding for the heritage sector. And we, as Chris highlighted at the start, we also worked collaboratively with the partners here and led by DCMS to provide cultural recovery funding throughout 2020 and 2021. Anyway, we came out of that last year and stood back and thought, you know, the world has changed. COVID has forced us all to reevaluate how we should be working and what's important for heritage. So with a bit of a shameless plug, we spent the last summer working on a new strategy, which we launched last week, and I carry it around at the moment. So Heritage 2033. I said to Josie that I asked ChatGPT to draft me a strategy last week, and it took me a minute, and this took me 6 months, but I would say it's slightly better than ChatGPT. But this sets out our plans and priorities for the next 10 years, and it's got 4 very, very clear priorities in it. So we went out and consulted, and we got over 4,000 responses over a very intense 3 months. And they said, what we really want you to do is, the first one is about saving heritage. It's really about protecting and conserving the UK's best heritage. The second one was about protecting the environment. That came through very strongly from our consultation. The third was about inclusive access and participation in heritage. And the fourth was about organisational sustainability. And there's a lot in this strategy about digital, particularly around access and participation, and recognising that digital and some of the things we've heard today are all about breaking down boundaries, reaching new audiences, sharing information in ways that we didn't think were possible just 5 years ago. And just sitting in the audience today for the first few sessions, hearing about some of the progress and ideas that has come through those discovery phases, I kept saying to Josie, so what's next? What are we going to do next? How do we bottle and take all that learning and think about what's the next stage of this project? I think, you know, from a Heritage Fund perspective, we want to be part of that. We want to collaborate with some of the other funders who've been here today and just keep that conversation going in terms of how we take this work forwards. I'm going to hand over to Josie, who's going to talk about some of our specific investments in digital.
Thanks. I'm going to be super brief because Rebecca's looking at me. So there's 3 things I want to just flash up before your eyes then. First of all is our open programme. So we fund a huge amount of digital collections already through the open programmes as the UK's largest funder of heritage. So we're already really, really invested in this area and this topic and the past, present and future of digital collections. Second area is around our digital skills for heritage work. It's a 4-point £2 million programme that has been supporting the sector throughout the pandemic and now continues to do so, in line with our direction from DCMS to support digital skills and raise use of digital across the sector. And that work will come to an end at around Christmas, but will continue in terms of our support for the sector, particularly in terms of how we support projects get the very most out of their funding, especially projects that are successful in getting funding to create or to add to or to work with digital collections. And then the third thing that I just mentioned very quickly is we're very, Isabel's already said, we're really pleased to be here today. It's really important for us to be part of this conversation going forward. One of the things that we have been doing recently is we sit on the DCMS Digitisation Task Force, and we recently had an event around digitisation to support that. From that, we've created specific guides to help small and volunteer-led organisations too. So we're kind of thinking very strategically about this in terms of our new strategy and how digital fits into that, but we're also actually providing a huge amount of practical support.
Thank you, Josie, and I'm also really thrilled to be here. And I'm going to take a slightly different approach. I will say a little bit about what DCMS is doing directly as a funder, but it is end-of-year review season in the civil service, so I've been doing lots of people's appraisals and looking back at all of their milestones and achievements over the past year. So I thought I'd spend a little bit of time also saying what we value about what Towards the National Collection is achieving, we being government. So we think that Towards the National Collection is brilliant and much needed in terms of enabling some pathfinding activity that might not otherwise have happened at all or might not have happened on this time frame. Most crucially, we really value the fact that Towards the National Collection is joining it all up to make the whole bigger than the sum of the parts and fostering collaboration, which I know was a big theme that has come out throughout the day. Collaboration between collections and showing different use cases. I also think it's been really helpful to see how Towards the National Collection is throwing up some of the really big existential questions that we need to answer as we think about how to digitise. So we've had some discussions at the steering board around the trade-off between generating commercial income versus open access, things like that. Digitising collections on this scale is still a relatively new activity in the grand scheme of things, and it's really invaluable to learn lessons early on and try and get it right first time. So I think that's a really important role for the programme as well. As lots of the speakers have said, that practical support is so vital, particularly for organisations that perhaps can't afford to have dedicated teams. So we particularly welcome the work that Towards the National Collection is doing to build digital capabilities and expertise in the sector and provide pathfinders to show the range of what's possible. Returning to collaboration, sitting on the oversight group, which is excellently chaired by Rowley Keating, there are all sorts of different partners coming together. So there's government, there's the research community via Arts and Humanities Research Council, of course. There are representatives from national museums, regional museums, from overseas museums, and other organisations with a particular expertise like Art UK. And the projects funded by Towards the National Collection are engaging not just our largest cultural institutions, but also, really importantly, I think, partnering with regional museums that have incredible collections in their own right. And we see that as really, really fundamental from a DCMS perspective. And a great example is the Transforming Collections Reimagining Art, Nation and Heritage Discovery Project with 16 partners across the UK, including Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art, Glasgow Museums and Manchester Art Gallery. It's almost trite to say that we live in an increasingly digital world, but Towards the National Collection is showing what's possible in terms of opening up the UK's impressive collections to the world, whether that be researchers to improve or to improve our access and engagement amongst audiences right across the UK. And I take Sharon's point very seriously on digital poverty, but also, you know, there are people that can struggle to access physical collections for a variety of reasons, and having a digital option is really, really wonderful. With all of these priorities in mind, DCMS is working directly with some of our own arm's length bodies to support projects that will enable the digitisation of collections. We've recently given the Natural History Museum an additional 20 million towards its major new collections and research centre. That will accelerate the digitisation of the Natural History Museum's irreplaceable collection and make collection-based research more efficient and preserve collections for future generations and open them up to global communities. The Blythe House programme is providing 186 million of government funding to relocate collections from a deteriorating site in Hammersmith to new storage facilities. And I'm sure lots of you out there will be really jealous of this and all the money being brought to bear. But of course, that includes the British Museum with its new archaeological research collection at Reading University, the V&A Storehouse in the Olympic Park, and the Science Museum taking more of its collection to its site in Wroughton in Wiltshire, which still has plenty of available space if anybody's looking for new collection storages. The Blythe House programme is providing secure and high quality storage and enhancing both physical but also digital access to those three museums' collections and enabling preservation and research opportunities. And then I can't ever give a speech without mentioning the Culture Heritage Capital programme. And we've had lots and lots of brilliant collaboration with the AHRC on that as well. That is a £3 million programme where we're working with the Arts and Humanities Research Council, leading academics, sector organisations, including Arts Council England and Historic England, to develop a framework for valuing culture and heritage assets. So for those of you that don't know, all government-funded projects are assessed using the Treasury Green Book, and that is really good at capturing monetisable benefits, so economic benefits, but what it doesn't yet do is capture cultural benefits and social benefits. DEFRA were real pathfinders on this. They spent a long time developing their metrics around natural capital, and we're now doing likewise for culture and heritage capital. And that means that if we're successful, the Green Book will be changed, and for HS3 or whatever it might be, the culture and heritage costs and benefits will also be taken into account alongside the economic benefits. So it could be really, really game-changing. And it will ensure a broad range of values and benefits that flow from our collections are captured by organisations in funding bids. We do have a couple of projects within that deal with digitisation. At the moment, we've done some work around the BFI archive, for example, but we certainly intend for the culture and heritage capital work to also factor in digital collections. And then finally, one thing that we do, if you know people looking around for their PhD topic, is we always publish areas of research interest, setting out our ambitions for what we really want to hear from academics about, where our evidence priorities are. And that includes, at the moment, an area of research interest around digital skills, capability, and assets. And I will leave it there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. So amongst other things, you've got lots and lots of inspiration and also tons of millions of quid sitting here. I'm just going to start off by asking a question about skills, because what we've done really brilliantly, I think, is we've talked about how we may be able to change the value we put on digital collections, how each of us values digital collections. But we also know that we need people to be able to create and enjoy those digital collections to actually get fruition of the money we're spending. So what as funders do we think we should be doing about the digital skills gap? Any takers?
I'm happy to loop in. Sorry, beat you to it. So I think the digital skills work we've been doing for the last couple of years, including the DASH survey, which for those of you who don't know about it, is a UK-wide benchmark of what digital confidence and skills looks like across the whole of the heritage sector. And we've run that twice now, so it's a super useful research tool. The work that we've done has been incredibly powerful, incredibly helpful, especially during the pandemic and beyond. I would like to say, though, you can provide digital skills as much as absolutely possible, and you will still not necessarily get the outcomes you want, because organisations don't just need digital skills. They lack capacity very often, they lack resource. Increasingly, what we're looking at and interested in is, what is the national infrastructure that supports and underpins all of that skills training and support that really makes it stick. and helps projects produce things that are going to be lasting for the next generation.
So yeah, I would say two things. There's entry level, so that is universities. It has to be embedded on the course